My family abandoned me at a rest stop when I was 22, leaving me stranded with no money or phone. Now, they have contacted me and asked for money. That summer, I turned 22. It was supposed to be just like any other day. I'd work at my father's hardware store for money and live at home because, according to banks, my father's college was not practical. I was also the perpetual punching bag for my golden kid brother Alan. We weren't destitute, but we weren't the sort to go on Disney vacations. So, when banks stated that we were going on a family road trip to my uncle's wedding in Colorado, I should have known something was up. 3 days into that horrible road journey, I was already regretting not making up an excuse to stay at home. My father and Alan had been taking turns playing their favorite game, making Salvador's life terrible. Mom, Irene, would periodically say, "That's enough," in her frail voice, but we all knew it was just a show. Look, I need to explain something about my family. Banks wasn't your typical dad. He was the type to wake you up at 3 a.m., to rant about a chore you forgot, or who will toss away your belongings if they get in his way. He had been telling me I was useless since I was able to grasp words. Alan quickly realized that he could either be Dad's mini-me or become like me. Guess which road he took? That morning, we came to a rest spot in Colorado that seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. Only fields, mountains in the distance, and a depressing tiny restroom facility with vending machines. I had been sleeping in the back of our Suburban and needed to stretch my legs and use the restroom. Dad and Alan were laughing over something, and Mom was checking her makeup in the visor mirror. I remember what I was wearing: an old Metallica t-shirt, trousers with a hole in one knee, and these beat-up Vans that I'd had for years. I did not take my phone because it was charging in the car. I didn't take my wallet, so why would I? We were in the middle of nowhere, and I was just taking a piss. I spent 10 minutes in that bathroom, perhaps less. When I walked out, blinking in the Colorado sun, the parking spot was vacant. Our dark green Suburban was gone. At first, I assumed they had moved it as a hoax. I wandered around the whole rest area. Nothing. That's the thing about betrayal by your own blood. It hits differently than any other type. I sat on the curb for an hour, telling myself they were simply trying to scare me and would be back. People came and left, and a few gave me strange looks. A trucker questioned if I was all right. I lied, saying I was waiting for my girlfriend in the bathroom. He nodded and departed. After 2 hours, I began to feel a chill in my stomach. They were not coming back. My initial thought was to borrow someone's phone and call them, begging them to come fetch me. However, when I was about to approach a mother with 2 children, something stopped me. A lifetime of memories flooded through my mind, every humiliation, every time they'd laughed at my expense, and every joke that was essentially cruelty with a punchline. I almost heard them. Alan's voice. "Dude, I bet he's crying right now." My father, "He'll figure it out if he's not as stupid as he appears." My mother's faint protest, which did not change anything. So, I made a decision. I approached that mother and asked to use her phone, but I did not contact my family. I contacted information and was given the phone number for the nearest shelter in Grand Junction, which is around 40 miles away. Then I asked her if she could give me a ride into town and said that my family had an emergency and had to leave, but they would send someone for me later. She hesitated, but I must have been innocent enough, since she agreed. That first night in the shelter was a reality check. I had nothing except the clothing on my back, no identification, money, or connections. Dave, the shelter employee, let me use their computer to seek out my uncle's address from a wedding invitation I had seen. I thought I would be able to travel to the wedding and see my family, but then I sat there staring at the screen, wondering why. Why pursue down folks who literally abandoned me on the side of the road for laughs? Instead, I set up a fresh email account. I searched up services for folks who needed emergency ID replacements, Googled cash-paying employment, and devised a plan. 2 days later, I was washing dishes at a small diner named Sunny. Geraldine, the proprietor, was a 60-something woman with purple-streaked gray hair and more tattoos than one would anticipate. I'd gone in, asked if they needed help, and informed her that my wallet had been stolen but that I needed work. She sized me up and remarked, "The dishwasher quit yesterday. You take from me, and you will die. Start now." That's the thing about rock bottom. You can only get up from there. For a week, I worked double shifts, slept in the shelter, and dressed in donated clothing. Dave assisted me in the process of obtaining a replacement ID by contacting vital records in my home state. With my first paycheck, I purchased a low-cost pay-as-you-go phone from Walmart. 7 days after they abandoned me, my phone rang. The number was unknown. I responded, and it was my mother, her voice shaking. She inquired as to my whereabouts and my well-being. They had been looking everywhere. It was only supposed to be a joke, she explained. They waited down the road for 20 minutes, returned, and couldn't find me. I listened to her stress and phony compassion. In the background, I could hear my father telling me to stop acting so theatrical and go to Uncle Rick's. I heard Alan laughing. "Salvador, are you there? Say something, we've been worried sick." That icy feeling in my gut was gone. Now there was just clarity. "You wanted to see if I could make it on my own," I explained, my voice firmer than it had ever been when speaking to them. "So watch me." I hung up, blocked the number, and then blocked every family number I could think of. I went to the Verizon store the next day and changed my phone number totally. I envisioned them becoming increasingly irritated as they realized their punching bag was not returning to be pummeled. 1 month later, I had my own studio apartment above a laundromat. It was small and always smelled like fabric softener, but it was mine. I worked my way up to prep cook at Sonny's, and Geraldine was showing me how to properly chop veggies without losing a finger. Sometimes I'd check my old email address, which my family knew. Messages piled up from Mom. "Please come home, we're sorry." From Dad. "This childish stunt needs to end right now." From Alan. "Dude, it was just a joke. Stop being such a..." I never replied. Not once. The thing about freedom is that once you've tasted it, you can't go back to the cage. I will not pretend it was easy. Some nights, I'd look through Instagram and see photographs of people with normal families who truly loved each other, and I'd feel an aching that no amount of them could satisfy. I experienced nights when loneliness threatened to take me whole. The holidays were the worst. But every morning, I'd wake up in my dingy little apartment, which smelled like Downy, go to my dishwashing job, where no one labeled me worthless, and construct my life one brick at a time. 3 months after they abandoned me at that rest stop, I checked my inbox for the last time. There was a fresh message from my mother. "Your grandmother is asking about you. Please just let us know you're alive." I closed the email, erased the account, and put my old SIM card in the dumpster behind Sonny's. That night, Geraldine showed me how to bake her renowned apple pie. She stated I had good pastry skills. It was the first real compliment I had received in many years. I never looked back. Update: 5 years after being abandoned at that Colorado rest area, I found myself staring at a familiar face in my Facebook page. Not because I was trolling my family's profiles, well, maybe I was, but because Alan had recently been mentioned in a local news piece back home. He'd received a DUI and wrapped his automobile around a telephone pole. Nobody heard except the pole. The publication had utilized one of his high school football photos. He appeared youthful and smug, in stark contrast to the fat mugshot below. That's the thing with karma. It goes at its own pace and never forgets an address. By then, I had established something like a life in Colorado. My terrible studio above the laundromat was eventually exchanged for a 1-bedroom with actual windows. I had worked my way up from dishwasher to line cook to assistant manager at Sonny's. Geraldine still ran the property with an iron fist and a flour-dusted glove, but she'd started treating me more like a quirky nephew than a charity case. My first major purchase, when I had actual savings, was a good laptop. Nothing spectacular, just enough to attend online community college classes in business management and basic accounting, which banks always claimed were for individuals who couldn't perform actual work. I'd spend my mornings at Sonny's, afternoons studying, and evenings at work. Rinse, repeat. Look, I'm not going to pretend that what occurred didn't leave me messed up. Trust issues? More like trust subscriptions, which I could cancel whenever someone got too near. I'd made only 2 friends in 5 years. My neighbor Doug, who played bass in a bad garage band and occasionally brought me homemade beer that tastes like hoppy dishwater, and Geraldine, if she qualified as a friend rather than a boss. That changed when Kendra began arriving at Sonny's every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork. She always got the same thing, Denver omelet with no tomatoes and extra coffee. She was often sitting at the counter with a textbook, med school. I later discovered she had this habit of completely shutting out while studying. For several minutes, she held the fork halfway to her mouth. I started timing her once, and her time was 7 minutes and 23 seconds before she noticed she was holding cold eggs. I had been giving her coffee refills for 4 months before she saw me. "I mean, you truly saw me." Her eyes widened slightly as she explained that my name tag was spelled incorrectly. It wasn't, but it became our strange little joke. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she would point out that I was wearing the wrong name Salvador. I would act startled. It was the stupidest flirtation ever, but it worked. Our first date was not even intended to be a date. Her study group canceled at the last minute, and she had a reservation at this pizza place that was tough to get into. I happened to be cleaning the counter when she received the cancellation SMS. The next thing I knew, I was seated across from her at Antonio's, both of us uneasily realizing this was precisely like a date. 6 months later, she moved into my flat. A year later, we moved into a somewhat larger place together. Nothing fancy, Just a 2-bedroom with a bathroom where the toilet did not run all the time and neighbors who did not practice bass solos at 2 a.m. Meanwhile, I used false accounts to keep track of my family. I'm not proud of it, but there it is. Dad's hardware store started failing after the Home Depot opened on the outskirts of town. I noticed him talking about it on community Facebook pages, with remarks becoming increasingly frantic and nasty. Mom's social media became a weird shrine to family, with regular throwback photos of us all smiling and postings about missing her boys, which was rich. She would tag Alan but never mention me, as if I had been erased. Alan moved from job to job, posting vague updates about haters and new opportunities, the standard social media smokescreen of someone whose life is circling the abyss. 3 years in, Geraldine approached me during inventory and informed me she was considering opening a second Sonny's shop on the opposite side of town. She asked if I was interested in running it, rather than owning it. This is an important distinction. I didn't sleep that night because I kept thinking it was a test or a joke. People like me did not have opportunities like that. Banks had ensured I understood that much. That is the problem about poisonous beliefs. They remain in your system long after you have left the serpent. But I said yes because Kendra, who was half sleeping next to me, whispered that it would be silly not to. Doug, through a haze of cannabis smoke, replied, "Duh, you practically run to the original place already." Because Geraldine was not Banks, wasn't my family, and had never made me feel useless. Sonny's East opened 6 months later, smaller than its predecessor and with a new menu, my menu. I worked 90-hour weeks for the first year and lost 10 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. I argued with Kendra about never being home. I came home to passive-aggressive post-its on the fridge several times, but they worked. People arrived. People came back. The food was delicious and the atmosphere was good. We weren't getting rich, but we were making do. 4 years after being abandoned, I earned enough to assist Kendra with her medical school loans. Not all of them, those creatures are monstrous, but enough to make an impact. She cried when I handed her the payment confirmation. Not cinematic crying, but lovely mascara tears. Real sobbing, snotty, red-faced, hiccuping crying. I had never felt more like a true person than in that moment. Then my granny died. I found out on Facebook. Mom captioned this lengthy, emotional homage with a million heart emoticons. Grandma Rose was the only one in the family who ever stood up to Banks, the only one who appeared to notice me. She would slip me $20 when no one was looking and instruct me to save them for my escape. I believe she meant college. It turned out to be more literal than that. I considered going to the funeral and even looked up airfares. Kendra said she'd come with me and hold my hand throughout the traumatic reunion. Doug offered me his lousy hatchback to drive instead. Geraldine simply shrugged and said, "Dead people don't know if you're there or not, so do whatever brings you peace." I didn't go. Instead, I sent flowers. A generic sympathy arrangement, signed Salvador, with no return address or note. "It's just me." The reaction on social media was quick. Mom is posting about signs and reaching out from beyond. Alan made cryptic remarks about prodigal sons. Banks said nothing publicly, but I could imagine the uproar behind closed doors. A week later, I received a friend request from a profile that I did not recognize. Some random name, no posts, and no buddies. I almost erased it until I noticed the message. "It's Uncle Rick. Your mom gave me your old email, but it bounced back. Are you okay? We've been worried. Your dad has been asking around about you." That night, I blocked the account. I had my first panic attack in 2 years, sitting on our bathroom floor at 3 a.m., trying not to wake Kendra, feeling like my lungs were collapsing, and picturing Banks chasing me down, showing up at Sonny's, and destroying everything I'd built. Kendra found me about an hour later. She didn't ask any questions. She simply sat with me, her shoulder touching mine. When I could finally breathe, she said the most basic thing: "They can't take anything from you that you don't give them." The next morning, I called a lawyer for guidance on restraining orders, just in case. I adjusted the privacy settings on everything and requested Geraldine to notify staff not to disclose any information about me to anyone. Practical steps. Power what you have power over. 5 years to the day after being abandoned, I married Kendra in a tiny wedding at a state park. Doug was my best man. Geraldine cooked the cake and cried the whole time, mascara pouring down her wrinkled cheeks. Kendra's enormous, boisterous family embraced me immediately, her father cracking dad jokes that didn't make me cringe, and her mother hugging me without sending off alarms in my head. That's the thing with family. It can find you even when you're not looking. A week after the wedding, I saw it while going through my dummy account late at night. Banks posted on a community website, asking for information on his son Salvador, whose last known location is Grand Junction, Colorado. "This is a family emergency." There was no emergency. I was already aware of this. What I didn't understand was why, after 5 years of silence, they were now hunting for me. So I probed deeper, made another phony account, joined community groups in my hometown, and pulled everything together piece by piece. The hardware company had closed, their house was in foreclosure, Mom was dealing with some medical concerns that she was hazy about, and Alan had returned home following his third DUI. They weren't seeking for me because they missed me, but because they needed something. And you know what? For the first time in 5 years, I smiled as I remembered them. Not because I was pleased with their tragedy, but because I discovered a crucial truth. I no longer cared. I closed the laptop, went into bed beside my sleeping wife, and made a decision. I would continue to observe from a distance, not out of hatred or love, but because sometimes the finest retribution is not what you do, but what you build, while they are busy destroying themselves. Finally, we have an update. It began with a LinkedIn notification. 15 years after being abandoned at that Colorado rest station, my perfectly planned existence had a flaw. Someone saw my profile 27 times in a single day. It's not rare for LinkedIn recruiters to do crazy things like that. What was remarkable was my brother's name, Alan Matthew. That is the thing with the past. It is patient. It will linger in the tall grass for years before striking. By then, my life had changed drastically from my first year in Grand Junction. Kendra had finished medical school, completed her residency, and was now working 3 days a week at a local clinic to spend more time at home with our children. We had 2, Ellie, 7, and Marcus, 4. The apartment above the laundromat had given way to a modest 4-bedroom home on the outskirts of town. Nothing spectacular, but with a yard where the kids could play and I could grow tomatoes, though they never quite worked out. Sonny's had expanded to 3 locations. Still not a major franchise or anything, but enough that I no longer had to work the line, except when someone called in sick. Geraldine had semi-retired 2 years before, but she still turned up unexpectedly to criticize how we made her pie crust recipe. I had made peace with my past, or so I thought. I still kept an eye on the family from afar, but the frequent checks had dwindled to maybe once every few months. Banks and Irene had downsized after losing their home, as far as I understood. Alan has been married, divorced, and married again. They all seem to have gone on with their lives, just as I had. However, the LinkedIn issue bothered me. 15 years of silence, and now this. I mentioned it to Kendra as we were performing our usual Sunday night activity. Folding laundry while half watching whatever Netflix show we were currently behind on. She paused, holding a mismatched sock in each hand, and asked whether I was alright. I nodded. What else could I say? That I was suddenly 22 years old again, stopped at a rest stop, and that I could hear Banks' voice in my head, calling me useless. 3 days later, I was in Sunny's East, the original second site, assisting with inventory because our supplier had sent the wrong type of coffee filters again, when Maya at the front desk called back to say there was a family looking for me. My first thought was of Kendra's parents, who occasionally surprised us when they passed through. I strolled out front, my thoughts already turning to how to persuade them to stay for supper. It was not Kendra's family. Banks appeared older, grayer, and his once intimidating physique had shrunk. Irene's face was pinched from years of effort, and her hair had been dyed an unnatural shade of brown. Alan resembled Banks at 40, with the same stance and technique of taking up space. There was a woman with them who I didn't recognize. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, and she was standing back as if she wasn't sure she belonged. Nobody spoke. The lunch rush cacophony faded away, leaving only my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. Banks broke first, asking for my name. I nodded, as my voice had evidently gone on vacation. Look, I'd envisioned this moment in 1,000 various ways over the course of 15 years. In some of them, I told them off brilliantly. In others, I was chilly and distant, unconcerned about their existence. In a couple awkward late-night situations, we even had a tearful reconciliation. Reality is invariably messier than fancy. I motioned to an empty table in the corner, asked Maya to get water, sat across from the folks who had once been my family, and waited. They'd discovered me through a magazine story titled Rocky Mountain Rising 10 Local Success Stories. It wasn't even a major feature, just a sidebar with a photo of me in front of Sunny's original location. But evidently, one of Mom's high school friends had moved to Colorado, saw it, and forwarded it to her with the caption, "Isn't this your son?" They'd made 107 missed calls to my former number in the years before it was disconnected. Mom had counted. She mentioned this as if it meant something. They spoke over each other. Mom mentioned how worried they had been. Banks about how I had misinterpreted what happened that day. Alan was uncomfortably trying to pretend like we were old friends catching up. The young woman, who turned out to be Alan's second wife Poppy, simply regarded me with curiosity. I let them talk and watched as they spun their own version of reality in which they were not the villains. I noticed how Banks continued looking at the restaurant, mentally calculating how much it would be worth. I noticed Mom's fingers waver slightly as she grabbed for her water. I noticed Alan's studied charm faltering whenever he thought I wasn't staring directly at him. Finally, when they ran out of steam, I asked the only important question. Why now? That's when the true tale emerged, in parts and pieces among awkward silences. Banks had medical debts, heart issues, and no insurance. The second residence was being foreclosed upon. Alan's business idea, something obscure about cryptocurrencies, had flopped terribly. Mom required knee surgery, which she could not afford. They weren't there for reconciliation, but for money. I should have become angry. Should have thrown them away. Instead, I felt an unexpected emotion. Sympathy. They seemed so little and desperate. These giants who had formerly ruled my entire universe were simply imperfect, broken beings. I asked them to supper at my house that night, explaining that I needed to contemplate and chat to Kendra. They agreed enthusiastically. Banks are already halfway to calling it a done deal. The afternoon was weird. I picked up Ellie from her dance lesson and assisted Marcus with his preschool show and tell preparations, all while texting Kendra updates on who was coming to dinner. She volunteered to take the children to her sisters. I said no. I wanted them there. I wanted my family to meet my family. Dinner was chicken enchiladas, my specialty. That wasn't anything exceptional. It was simply a recipe from the back of an old El Paso box that I had modified over the years. Ellie set the table without being asked, meticulously placed the forks on the incorrect side until Kendra quietly corrected her. Marcus insisted on wearing his Spider-Man outfit because it was Tuesday, and it appears that Tuesday is now Spider-Man Day. When the doorbell rang, I nearly dropped the dish I was bringing to the table. Kendra clutched my arm as she passed, whispering that she had my back anyway. The children looked up with interest, realizing that something significant was happening. That's the thing about dreaded moments. When they occur, they're both worse and better than you expected. The introductions were awkward. Even after adjustments, Banks continued to refer to Kendra as Karen. Irene couldn't stop crying every time she looked at the kids, which terrified Marcus. Alan and Poppy were the least bad, making genuine attempts at polite conversation, but Alan kept hinting about family supporting family. After dinner, Kendra brought the kids upstairs for baths and bedtime, giving me a look that said, "Text if you need extraction." Then it was just me and them, sitting in a living room that felt too small. Banks began on the pitch, talking about how family sticks together and how he'd always known I'd be successful. A lie. How they only needed $20,000 to get back on their feet, alone, of course. I let him continue, then asked him if he remembered what he told me on my 18th birthday. He gave a blank gaze. I said to him, "At least you can't disappoint me anymore, once you're not legally my problem." I asked Mom if she recalled what she did after Banks tossed away my acceptance letter to community college. Nothing. She had done nothing. I asked Alan whether he remembered telling my first girlfriend that I was probably, in any case, when she came to the house seeking for me. They squirmed and made excuses. Banks' voice began to take on a deadly edge, which used to make me shrink. But here's what happened. I stopped shrinking. I was 15 years and a million miles away from that person. I went to my office, returned with an envelope, and delivered it to Banks. The check was for $73.50. Banks glanced at it, perplexed, and wondered what the hell this was supposed to be. I responded. In 2010, that was exactly what a Greyhound ticket from Grand Junction to our hometown would have cost, the exact amount it would have taken for me to make it back home from where you abandoned me. The hush was absolute. Then Banks began shouting at me, calling me ungrateful and greedy, and claiming that I had always been a disappointment. The greatest hits record from my childhood is being played one more time. I didn't argue or shout back. Just stood up and informed them that it was time to leave. Mom used a different approach. Tears and guilt. How could I do this to my family? Alan went cold. The Pleasant Brothers mask had entirely slipped. Poppy simply seemed embarrassed for all of them. When they eventually departed, Banks crumpled the check and dropped it on our doorstep. I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs becoming unsteady. Kendra came downstairs and asked if I was all right. I nodded, not trusting my own voice. We cleaned up the dinner dishes in silence, checked on the sleeping children, and prepared for bed as if it were any other night. As I was configuring the security system, I accessed the front entrance camera on my phone. They remained in the driveway, arguing. Banks is gesticulating violently, and his mother is sobbing. Alan was looking at our house with an attitude that I know all too well, jealousy mingled with hatred. Finally, they hopped into their rental car and drove away. I have never seen or heard from them again. Do not expect to. The chapter is finished. That's the thing about revenge, the best type is something you live rather than do. Every beautiful moment with my children, every inside joke with Kendra, Every peaceful Sunday morning with nothing to worry, and every ordinary day in a life constructed on my terms. I never got back home. I did something better. I constructed one.